Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to our show, please smash that subscribe button. You can also support us by joining as a YouTube member, be a Patreon, or donate small amount in the link given in the description below. But the least you can do is to watch the show, hit like, share, and please comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest today, Professor Mohammad Marandi. Professor Marandi teaches at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much for inviting me again.
I want to discuss what's going on in Washington, D.C. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, said Donald Trump yesterday at a press conference in Washington with his buddy, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We will own it, he said, proposing to convert Gaza into a new real estate named Riviera. I just wanted to ask you, what's your first impression on two things? One is to have a criminal in the White House being given such a reception. And secondly, this total disregard for any kind of international norm and being such a lunatic state as the US is always, but so brazenly. Your first impression on these two accounts?
Well, the White House has always housed criminals, so you shouldn't expect criminals not to be invited as guests. Uh, Trump is no more or no less criminal than Biden or Obama. Biden brought about the genocide in Gaza. He gave the ammunition and the weapons and the aid alongside the Europeans and others. And regional countries like Turkey, like Egypt, like Jordan, like the Emirates, they facilitated the genocide through trade and business. And so there are a lot of people who are responsible for the genocide. And Trump is a genocide supporter, so he's no different from Biden. And then, of course, Obama, who carried out the genocide in Yemen alongside the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Europeans and NATO, and then, of course, the destruction of Libya. And as we saw recently, um, Tulsi Gabbard in the Senate confirmation hearings, she spoke about the dirty war in Syria and about the fake chemical attacks and how the United States and its allies, like Mr. Erdogan, among others, supported Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria and finally brought them to power. So Trump he has no special place in this list of genocidal leaders or supporters of genocide. But I think, of course, obviously his statements were void of any morality, shameful and disgusting. But I don't think it's, at least my interpretation is that it's not a serious plan. I think that obviously the people of Gaza, the Palestinians there, they show that they're not going anywhere after surviving a almost 16-month long Holocaust. But I think the real objective is probably, and this is just my personal speculation, is that Trump is in a stronger position than Netanyahu. And Netanyahu was forced to accept the ceasefire because of the resilience of the resistance, the axis of resistance, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, and all of them together put a lot of pressure on the Israeli regime, and ultimately Trump forced the ceasefire. And I think that that puts him in a commanding position compared to Netanyahu. And in this meeting, I think Trump sort of gave this as a said this in order to strengthen Netanyahu's position so that Netanyahu would continue with the ceasefire. I think that's how it's working. I think that right now Netanyahu has a problem because he promised his fanatical allies in the cabinet that he will continue the war. He'll go back to the war. But I think Trump doesn't want war, not because he's a great person, but because he wants quiet. That's how I see it. And so Trump is giving, he's given some concessions like the bunker busters that will be used to kill people and innocent people in future. And probably he will give concessions in the West Bank, I assume. Again, it's speculation. But I think what he wants from Netanyahu is for him to continue with the ceasefire. And so he said this in order to make yet Netanyahu's coalition partners happy. And I think they are happy because they're hoping that they can expel the Palestinians. So I think maybe the reason why he did this was not because he really wants to do it, but he wants to strengthen Netanyahu's hand and keep him in power. And thus Netanyahu will give him a concession, and that is not to expand the war. And also probably Netanyahu wants the United States to attack Iran. And of course, that's I think that would bring down the Trump regime if there was war with Iran. So I think in order to get, AIPAC off his back, Netanyahu off his back, and to push for the second phase of the ceasefire, he said, okay, we're going to empty Gaza of Palestinians, and we're not going to implement the third phase of the deal. But I think he wants at least to get to the second phase, finish the second phase of the ceasefire agreement. That's how I see it. That's how I'm interpreting it. Because I can't see any scenario when the United States goes into Gaza and tries to clear out Gaza. It's not going to happen. And no country in the region can afford to help them out. I mean, true, Egypt, Jordan, Mr. Erdogan, the Emirates, all of them collaborated with Israelis or cooperated with Israelis, but none of them can afford to take in refugees, because I think that will be the camel that the straw that breaks the camel's back.
In fact, when Netanyahu left for DC, his finance minister Bezalel Smotrich was threatening to collapse his government if he doesn't restart the war with Hamas again. And apparently, he seems to be a bit happy with what Trump has said. But I want to ask you that a key question that has been left out open within the ceasefire is the question of who rules Gaza. And the answer has to be quite obvious. It has to be people of Gaza who would elect who would rule them. But it seems that Israel, the United States, and vast majority of the West, even France and Germany, which came out and condemned what Trump said on Tuesday, said that, but we stand by the fact that Hamas should go. And it seems to me that Trump's instigation kind of blackmails the Palestinians to have their own leadership if Hamas is their overwhelming choice, which seems to be the case. Your comment on that observation?
Well, first I have to point something out, and that is that it may be that Trump actually tries to take over Gaza. I'm not saying that it won't happen. And my analysis, what I feel that Trump may be after, does not lessen the sheer immorality of his statement. And the world should mobilize against Trump in the United States and condemn him for this, and to put pressure on regional countries to stop cooperating with the United States. And these verbal condemnations by governments, these are useless. There has to be pressure. So I'm not belittling what he said. I'm just saying that I don't think that he's serious about emptying Gaza. And it is hypocritical that these European regimes are condemning him for what he said about Gaza, but they supported the Holocaust in Gaza. So it's okay to slaughter the Palestinians, but it's not okay to expel them from their land. There is no They're not taking a moral position. These are immoral leaders, just as immoral as Trump. But I don't think Trump is, or the Europeans are in any position to impose anything on Gaza. And Hamas is not going to give up any power or authority because they have popular support. And the allies of Hamas, like Islamic Jihad, they are going to strengthen Hamas, and all of their partners in the resistance in Gaza will stick with them. The Palestinian Authority has no popular support. In the West Bank, they're not popular either. In polls that were recently carried out, they only had a very small segment of support among the population, and those are largely people who are corrupted by the system, and that's how the Israelis have been working for decades. That's how the West works. That's how all these Western NGOs work in Lebanon and elsewhere. They corrupt societies, and they and through them they bring about regime change, color revolutions, or other forms of misery upon people. So the Palestinian Authority is only in power because the Israeli regime is behind them in the West Bank. But in Gaza, they have absolutely no chance whatsoever of taking over. And we have to all recall that, what happened after the elections and how Hamas won those elections. If there were elections held today, have no doubt that not only would Hamas and its allies together win in Gaza, they would win in the West Bank. But the Europeans and the Americans, they have no interest in democracy. They never had any interest in democracy. I think that facade, that is all gone now. By after Gaza, I think no sane person believes that the West believes in human rights or women's rights or children's rights or freedom of speech or anything like that. That is all out the window. And again, it's just like the Europeans condemning Trump for saying the Palestinians must go, but for 16 months, almost 16 months, they've been helping out with the Holocaust.
The world has to learn how to live with Trump, who openly threatens the sovereignty of any country, but it's difficult for the West to learn to live with someone that the Palestinians elect for themselves. I want to ask you about the so-called Abraham Accord, given Trump is said to be one of the architects of that accord, which is normalizing ties between the absolutist Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and Israel. Something that Noam Chomsky, when we communicated, he used to come to our show often, and he said that it's a coalition of reactionary states put together to put a further blow to the rights of the Palestinians. Saudi Arabia and every other state in the region has reacted against what Trump said. Does this put Trump's own Abraham Accord at stake?
Well, a couple of things actually that I can say about this is that whether it's the Abraham Accords or whether it's just this claim that regional countries are going to support the removal of the Palestinian people, what Trump is doing is he's weakening his own allies. He's weakening these despots, because whether he's lying or not, and whether they really in secret agree with him or not to try to remove the Palestinian people, a lot of people are going to question their governments. They're going to question these regimes. People in these Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, or in Egypt, or in Jordan, or elsewhere, they're going to asking themselves, are our governments secretly negotiating to help the Americans and the Israelis remove the Palestinians? So even if it's not true, it raises questions. And that undermines the legitimacy of these regimes in the eyes of their own people. So what Trump is doing by making these claims is that he's weakening his own camp. He's weakening members of his own camp. He's weakening these regimes that are already weak and vulnerable even further. And so whether it's and if it's the Abraham Accords, it's the same because right now, after what happened in Gaza and the Holocaust that we saw there, and now the brutality, the sheer brutality that we're seeing in the West Bank, and of course the genocidal attacks in Lebanon and so on, no one can really, pursue the Abraham Accords and not be afraid. I mean, the Saudis, I'm sure, would be very worried about taking a step in that direction after what has happened in Gaza. So uh, it's going to, if they do move in that direction, it's going to be costly and dangerous. But in any case, Trump has weakened his own allies. He's weakened these proxies. And it's very interesting, by the way, that the Syrian, the terrorists who rule over Syria right now, the Europeans are fine with the terrorists, but they want Hamas to go. They're fine with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. And you see these diplomats and you see these politicians from the UK and elsewhere going to visit them, but Hamas must go. So the people who carried out 9/11, the people who carried out beheadings, the people who burned all these people alive, the people who would drown people in cages, these are all good. Jolani or Shara, he killed thousands of Iraqis with car bombs in Baghdad and other cities. That's fine. He can, he's a good guy. And one of the things I think is really important is that to keep in mind is those people in our region who support these terrorists in Syria, their position is very hypocritical because on the one hand, they don't trust the United States. They say that the United States is evil and how it conspires against the Palestinian people. But on the other hand, they're on the same side as the Americans, and they've been on the same side as the Americans in Syria for the last 13, 14 years. So they've been helping the United States pursue its dirty war in Syria to destroy Syria along, Mr. Erdogan. He's responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrians. These people they're answerable. They have to answer that question. How is it that U.S. policy in Syria is something that you support, but you condemn it in Palestine? But in any case, I think that it's going to be virtually impossible after what has happened in Gaza to bring any of the regimes in the region, even those that have relations with Netanyahu, like Erdogan, like Abdullah of Jordan, like Sisi, and like Mohammed bin Zayed, to ask them to do more than what they're already doing will be very difficult. So I think the Abraham Accords or the notion of expelling Palestinians from their homeland, I think that's just out of the question.
We had former US Ambassador Chas Freeman recently on our show, and something he said I wanted your reaction is he said Israel has achieved the impossible, which is bring together the Shia and the Sunni world in the Middle East together, at least uh, as far as the Palestinian cause goes. Do you think there is something in that statement?
Yes, I believe that is true to a significant degree. The United States has been creating a divide between a sectarian divide, racial. They've been using sectarianism, racism, and religious hatred for many years now, many decades now, but especially after the revolution in Iran, it's been used much more and often through Saudi Arabia in the 1980s and the 1990s, until Mohammed bin Salman came to power and he distanced himself from these extremist groups, and their funding has decreased ever since. But interestingly, now it's Mr. Erdogan who's taken over, and it's Qatar that is funding these extremist groups almost exclusively. So they're now his henchmen. But yes, these groups have had a huge impact. But I think that after the sacrifices made by Hezbollah and Gaza, which are unique. I mean, the people of Gaza fought for their lives, but Hezbollah willingly sacrificed themselves to help to save the people of Gaza. And the war on the Lebanese border was unprecedented. There's never been such an intense war between the Israeli regime and anyone. Um, Compared to when we look at what was going on for a couple of months along the Lebanese border. And ultimately, the ceasefire was just uh, a a a decrease in the hostilities. Otherwise, the Israelis kept their forces along in the north. So Hezbollah, they made huge sacrifices. Ansarullah made huge sacrifices. The Iraqis, and we saw that in Abu Ubaida's speech. He thanked Iran, he thanked Hezbollah, he thanked Ansarullah, he thanked the Iraqis, and he thanked Jordanian citizens who, on their own, at their own initiative, went into Palestine and fought and were martyred. So I think that is very substantial, and that I think uh, weakened this racist and sectarian narrative that has been created that has been promoted for decades now, and it currently is being promoted by Qatar and others and Turkey and the Turkish regime. Uh, but but in any case, it is something that should be of concern always, because as the West grows weaker, in order to maintain hegemony, they have to use the tools of divide and rule more extensively.
My final question is about US-Iran relationship. Donald Trump, just having come to power, also signed an executive order to uh, impose the sanctions even more brutally on Iran, while maintaining that he is open to a deal. That's something that he is doing even with the Russians, even with everyone. And I wanted to ask you, what's the feeling in Tehran and Iran in general about the U.S. at this moment, as far as their relationship goes? And secondly, to what extent is Iran worried about further sanctions, given a lot of oil trade now goes to China, and the United States is imposing tariff war and trade war on China as well? Um, to what degree the US can actually hurt the Iranian economy, given there is also idea and popularity among sections in Iran that they should normalize relationship with the West because the economy takes the toll.
Well, I've been in Moscow for the last three, days. So I don't know exactly. I have to go back to Tehran to be able to give a better answer to that question. As far as I know, and I've been very busy, so I haven't been following the news as well as I should have. But as far as I know, it's not an executive order. But in any case, the United States has already imposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. When Biden came to power, he did not remove any of those sanctions. In fact, he's repeatedly been adding new sanctions, to new companies or companies that have been created, they get sanctioned and so on. So there really isn't anything for Trump to sanction. And it's just like Russia. Iran and Russia are both basically under maximum pressure sanctions. In fact, recently the Russian oil fleet and their oil and gas companies, which have been sanctioned, basically what that's done is it made Russia become more like Iran, because Iran has already been sanctioned. Um, this oil and gas industry completely, this banking industry as well. So the Iranians have learned how to circumvent the sanctions regime, and it does trade with China, not because during the last 4 years the United States has become more lenient, but because Iran and China have devised new ways to do trade without being vulnerable to the Americans, without using Western financial institutions and so on. and by not using tankers that are under the authority of the West or fearful of Western uh, dictates. So I cannot say for certain, but I think it will be much more difficult for Trump to be able to put pressure on Iran this time around. I'm not saying he's not going to do anything or that he won't be able to do some things, but this is not 7 years ago. The situation is much different. And China, as I think you were alluding, as you were saying, I think you're implying that China is also um, different from the China 7, 8 years ago, and it has a vested interest in ignoring the United States, or resist, or is going to resist the United States more today than before. So I don't think that the Americans have many cards up their sleeves, and and Trump doesn't have a special card up his sleeve that Biden didn't have. There's nothing new in there's nothing new. He doesn't have some special power or some special authority that didn't exist before. So I think it's going to be more difficult. In Iran, there are those who want an agreement with the United States, but I think that in general, the the mood in Tehran is different from 2015. In 2015, after we signed a nuclear agreement with the United States, they began violating it from day one under Obama, and then Trump tore up the agreement. So even though many do want an agreement, but they don't want to be cheated again like in 2015. So and also Iran's position today is much stronger than it was back then. And the United States has many more difficulties, like the war in Ukraine. So the circumstances have changed. Iran has a stronger position. And also, Trump, not only did the United States violate the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and then later on tore it up, but also we saw the Minsk Accords, how the West betrayed Russia, and also now Trump is saying the third phase of the ceasefire agreement uh, is 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 rubbish and shouldn't be implemented. That's a ceasefire that was basically signed under his pressure. So if Trump is going to betray the Palestinians and the Russians and the Iranians, I mean, if we look at his past track record, that is going to make it all the more difficult for Iranians and Russians to negotiate with Trump in the future because he's simply not someone who can be trusted. So negotiations with the United States, potential negotiations, I don't know if they will take place, but the Iranians are going to be much more cautious than before.
Professor Marandi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.